Well, hello everyone. We will wait for people to begin joining us, getting to be a part of the class tonight. All right, we've got a couple of folks, looks like, are jumping in there. Hi to Mona. Hi to Jerry. Got the Booths there as well. Hello, Booth family. We've got 12 folks there. Andy Noyes, welcome Andy. Hi Mona, thank you. Doreen Blacketer is H-E-R-E, here and present. Brian Lair has joined us from the Netherlands of Rimrock. Thanks Brian for jumping in there. And Tara will not share Brian's device, so she also is here on her own device. The Treats are H-E-R-E. We've got Marilyn from Plentywood. Nice to have you. Nice to see you again, Marilyn. Let's see, we'll give a few seconds here as we've got folks who are jumping in and joining us. Welcome, Holly. Glad to have you here. Brian says, you are correct, sir. He is not sharing his screen with anyone. Most certainly not his wife. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Rhonda. Glad you're H-E-R-E. The Blazinas have joined us using Carrie's account. Carrie must be the tech-savvy person in the family. Jerry is with us as well. And another Jerry Ford saying, hi, everyone. Shayla Bird. Hi, Shayla. Steve and Mona are also not sharing devices tonight. So welcome to Steve as well. All right, I think we've got enough folks joining us to get started. So tonight we are going to start with a little bit of a party. Oh, there we go. Via text, we have the Traps also joining us. I can't see their comments there, but they are here with us. So yeah, we're going to start with a little bit of a party tonight. So I've got some fireworks specially prepared for the occasion. Oh, I got to get the camera turned around so you can see them before they... Oh, man. I just set off fireworks and I forgot to show the camera. So I spent all that money on those beautiful fireworks. Oh, there they go again. Oh, if you guys could see them. Beautiful. Okay. So what we're going to do in our little mini celebration tonight is we are going to step back for a minute and appreciate everything that we've learned to do over the last few weeks-ish. Because you may not realize, but in the last few months, we've done some pretty spectacular things. For folks that maybe we might say, one might say something to the effect that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And I would simply look at them and say, yeah, but have you met the Billings Church of Christ? We got some pretty cool folks out there learning a lot of new things. So let's go ahead and just begin by celebrating the things that we've learned to do. And if you want to share personally, you're welcome to do that. But I'm thinking more as a congregation. What are some things that we've learned to do, some things that we've been able to do, some things that we've been doing over the last couple of months, just as we recognize the leaps and bounds by which we've grown. So go ahead and use your comment feature and just share some ways that we're doing things now that we were not doing before that. Brian says we have a YouTube page. I was talking to Corinna Slater today, and she even mentioned YouTube, and I thought that was pretty cool. Corinna's birthday is today. I don't know if she's on here yet or not, but happy birthday to Corinna. Doreen says we've been Zooming, and even the fact that we know what Zoom is, let alone that we can take Zoom, a noun, and make it a verb, I mean, that's pretty impressive. Jeff mentioning a similar sort of thing. We've been figuring out how to navigate and utilize Zoom as a congregation. What are some other things that we've learned to do or are learning to do, things we've figured out to do or we're trying to figure out within the last, say, couple of months? I've got a list of about 9 here. Yeah, Steve is mentioning leading a small Zoom group. So for some of you, it's getting on and figuring out the technicalities of Zoom. And for others of you, it's figuring out how do you even lead a group. And so, yeah, Steve, that certainly takes a different approach. So yeah, Brian mentions that we went a long time without Facebook posts, and now we have several. So we went from a Facebook page that was pretty much like the desolate, barren desert to now occasionally you'll see a fauna somewhere along the way. Yeah, Carrie just mentions just generally adjusting to all the change. Jerry mentions being more vigilant about staying healthy and kind of paying attention to some of those pieces. Eric mentions we've learned how to social distance. We've had to learn how to have conversations, discussions, how to interact with each other through this socially distant thing. Sydney Trapp says the drive-by birthday parties. So we've realized that we might not be able to celebrate, whether they be birthdays or anniversaries, or even shown compassion. When Janet Shaw died, I know a group of people went by and just drove by as a parade. So we've learned to find new ways to honor each other and to celebrate each other. Jerry mentions how to do couch church. So we've figured out sometimes even just the tech of, okay, where do I go to watch this? How do I do that? Mona mentions talking through a mask. So we've had to learn just that what initially feels pretty awkward, right, is having a conversation through a mask. So some of the things that, and if you have other things, go ahead and you can be leaving there. The things that I had in addition is kind of surprising. Nobody even mentioned doing Facebook Live classes, which is what we're doing right now. Now, maybe all of you knew how to do that. You've learned how to comment. You've learned how to make little hearts fly up and make little thumbs fly up. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And I will be completely honest, I don't even know how to do that. When we've been at home, when Rod taught the last couple of weeks, I didn't know how to do that, and so I just told Jerry to take the lead on that. So that's all things that you guys know how to do that I still don't even know how to do. Making communion bread, yeah. So we've gone from this kind of show up and we'll get you what you need to kind of, all right, I need to make sure that I'm prepared for these things. We've learned to do our meal train with contactless delivery. So, going and dropping off the food and all of that sort of thing. We've learned how to decide, make decisions, implement decisions, seek feedback, all electronically without a single in-person meeting. I mean, think about if somebody said 3 months ago, like, that we would figure out how to do that. I don't know that everybody would think that was really possible. Even just this last week, we figured out how to do a pantry pounding using kind of an electronic sign-up form. We've learned to make contributions without passing the basket. Lori mentions that she spoiled on the homemade communion bread. Yeah, if you've tried the rip open thing that we did Sunday, it may take a little bit of adjustment for those of you who have not. People comparing recipes here. We've learned how to express appreciation without irregular forms of communication and contact. I certainly have received what I think is probably more than my fair share of what I deserve of letters, of people coming by the house and just kind of just showing kindness and really just, even though you can't see each other, just being able to experience love. In fact, so Jerry and I are supposed to be on our 20th anniversary trip right now. And we were going to be in Cancun, and just this afternoon, someone to whom my family spent the entire dinner trying to figure out who that someone was, brought a make-your-own beach kit. So we got some sand, and we got some ice, and some sparkling grape juice, and some of those sort of things. And so, I mean, we have learned to show appreciation through all of this. And so I just really want us to just stop for a minute and just celebrate and appreciate the fact that we've been able to figure out how to do all of these things. And so once again, as a part of the celebration, fireworks. All right, so there's the fireworks. Now, let's also remind ourselves of something else, which is, what did we not change? So go ahead and use the comment feature. So we've changed a bunch of things. We've figured out a bunch of things. But let's use the comment feature and say, but what did not change? So what are some things that you see as consistent, unchanging aspects of this? Sheila mentioning in terms of change, opening our home for Bible studies and lunch. And so Doreen mentions the love that we share. So all of these other things changed, but yet we've been finding ways in new vehicles to express love for one another. And I would certainly agree with that, Doreen, that we've seen a lot of people who have really been, for me, for sure, a great example of what love and care looks like. What are some other things that we did not change, even in the midst of all of these things that have changed? Jerry mentions our dependence on God. And so as we've been going through all of this, we've not said, we're just going to do this by our own power or effort, but that we realize God's part in that, God's leadership in all of that. Jeff mentions we've still observed worshiping our great God. So we've, even despite all of this, we've found a way to do that. Donnie sent a text congratulating on the anniversary. Thank you, Donnie. I appreciate those kind words. What are some other things that you think that has not changed, even in the midst of everything around us that has changed? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on my list. Things that have not changed. I have on my list our values, which I think that would probably kind of echo what Doreen was saying in terms of our love there. Our focus on the Bible. We've not said, well, since we can't do Bible classes in person, let's just study Mark Twain or whatever. I mean, we still are seeking God's will through the Bible. Gay mentions our affection for each other, and Doreen is saying that we are still a community, and so our relationships with one another, and the importance of that remains. I think our identity has remained the same. What we kind of stand for. Our view of God, I mean, all of that remained the same. Our core message of hope in God remains the same. The Holy Spirit enabling us and working through us remains the same. Our mission has remained the same. And so we see in all of these things that we have managed to change a lot in a very short period of time, in a way that's probably surprising to most of us. And then also simultaneously, we've had the wisdom to know what ought not to change and what shouldn't change through the process. So while we're speaking about changes, I have an announcement to make. And Jerry Ford, if you have the podcast link, if you would put that up there. One of the changes I'm going to try for a month is I've started a new podcast stream, and there'll be a link coming in just a moment. And what I'm going to use that podcast stream is for dealing with insights, questions, and explanations on the text that I preach on Sunday. So sometimes whenever I preach, there's some unpacking I need to do, some, for lack of a better word, exegetical study work that I need to do. But time just doesn't really allow me to do that in a kind of standard 20-25 minute sermon. And so what I'll be doing is each week posting this separate podcast. So if you're subscribed to the churches, you won't get that. You have to subscribe to this one. But a separate podcast that will allow people to ask questions, or ask maybe even specifically, why in this text did you interpret it or go that direction with it rather than this direction? So those will be pretty short. This week's, I did it already for Sundays. It was only about 4 minutes. But that's just an announcement of something that's changing. Steve mentions that Sunday is still the Lord's Day, even if we can't meet. And so you'll see the link there that Jerry Ford just posted that has the link for the new. Again, I'll try it for about a month and just see. But if you have any questions on sermons, you go ahead and send those to me, and we'll see if we can't get those questions incorporated in that process. Now, one of the things I wanted us to look at this is to realize that I think even since the very beginning of the church has been a living, growing, changing, life-filled organism. It is not a stale, dying, static object. Like as we think about church, church is something that grows. It's like a human body, that it's not supposed to just simply be a static, though it has static elements. That's some of the things that we mentioned even as us as a body. So on the one hand, it's always staying the same, some of those core aspects and elements and commitments, but on the other hand, it never stays the same. The church is constantly undergoing change. It's adapting to new things. And so we're going to look at through Acts tonight, and we're going to look at some of those places. And as we get to some parts, I'm going to just kind of do an aside and say, here's, I think, a principle that we need to remember in terms of innovation or adaptation for us as a church. And so if you have your Bibles, we're going to be, first of all, in Acts chapter 2, verses 44 through 47. Acts 2, 44 through 47. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all people. And day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. So a church that is growing, a church that is dynamic, a church that is active, will have these different events, activities going on. And as we read this in Acts 2, 44 through 47, I think we see it's all good news, because it is. But having the privilege of getting to look ahead, what we don't realize now, unless we've read ahead, is that we actually have two elements that are kind of like heading for a head-on collision with each other. And those two elements are in this text. The first is, in verse 45, they would distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. So people are sharing generously, giving to those who have need. And then the other element that's going to kind of, in some ways, conflict a little bit with this is that the Lord added to their number those who are being saved. And what the church doesn't yet realize, we have the advantage, again, of having read Acts, is these two things are going to, at some point in the future, converge and one will create an issue for the other. And we find that, of course, in Acts chapter 6. So if you want to turn your Bibles ahead to Acts 6 and verse 1. Now during those days, when the disciples were increasing in number, the Hellenists complained against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. So the first thing we want to point out here is what caused the problem. So the question is, what caused the problem? The problem is introduced right at the beginning of Acts chapter 6, verse 1, when the disciples were increasing in number. So pay really, really close attention to the fact that this issue kind of grows out of growth. And so kind of a couple of my church principles here. And Jerry, if you want to go ahead and post the Google Docs there, I have a handout. If you didn't get a chance to see that yet, Jerry will post a handout that will have the list of all of these different church principles. But the first is that the church is an interconnected body. A change, either good or bad, in one part of the body may necessitate a change in a completely different part. So if you think about maybe the church as kind of these dominoes that are set up, I mean, if you adjust one piece of that, it's going to affect and to impact something else. And that change or that new element doesn't even have to be something bad. In this case, it's something really, really good. The church was growing. Disciples were increasing in number. And we would naturally think, well, if good things are happening, then the outflow of that, the result of that is going to be just simply good results. But we realize that both challenges and opportunities can lead to a healthy change. So for a church, both challenges and opportunities can lead to a healthy change. A loss in one area may lead to a gain in another, and a gain in another area may lead to a loss in another. So, church is growing. My question is, what happened as a result? If we look at our text, what happened as a result is that some of the Hellenists began to complain because they were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. So do you see how these two seemingly good things have now kind of come to a head? Which is, as they are growing, they're no longer able to essentially keep up with the increased demand of doing what? Of sharing with any who had need. So as far as the complaining is concerned, almost across the board, that's negatively viewed in Scripture. You know, whenever you think about Israel complaining against Moses and Aaron in Exodus 16:2 or Numbers 11:1, the people complaining. I mean, complaining is never kind of shown as here's a great pathway forward. But what we do also recognize is that when these things kind of come to a head as a church, somehow it needs to be made aware that this issue is creating this other issue, and something's going to have to be dealt with, and something's going to have to, essentially, something needs to change because this new situation has demanded it. In the language of one writer, he calls it holy dissatisfaction. I mean, somehow we need to communicate holy dissatisfaction, which is the disconnect between what is and what could be. So I guess in a positive way, how do you think you can complain, quote unquote, positively? What might be the options available where you see a disconnect between what is and what could be in the church? Somehow it has to be put on the target. Somehow it has to be something that others are aware of it. So what are some things that you think you could do to help make others aware of a disconnect between where the church is and where it could be? Brian says that the people are the church and all people are different, so more people equals more differences. Let's see if I can get this to open. I'm getting a see more message here. Okay, in addition, people may change as they mature in Christ. Yeah, so we see this as, you know, any sort of growth may put attention somewhere else in the church system, because something that typically happened when the church was smaller is now creating an issue. Here's my suggestion in terms of maybe the best way to creatively complain. How to express holy dissatisfaction is observing what you see wrong and also making 3 suggestions to solve it. I think that the most valuable feedback that I've received as a minister is, here's where I think that we've gone off track, and here's where I think that the track should go or could go. That type of feedback tends to be far more useful than someone simply saying something to the effect of, this is dumb, and you explain the complexity of the situation and they say, oh, I don't have any ideas how you're going to solve that, but I just wanted you to know that this is dumb. That in this particular case, it's being raised, and there is, you know, again, how they raise it's probably not the best way to raise it, but somehow when there is this disconnect, it needs to be raised. So another kind of church principle that we realize here is that the church is an adaptive organism. It's not a dead object. So the church does need to learn to adapt. So we've had these 2 things come to a head, and the church can't just say, we're going to just keep doing what we're doing. There needs to be some way that the church adapts to this new situation. Here's, I think, a really important principle that we find here is that doing nothing can actually move a church further from its core mission. I'm going to repeat that again. Doing nothing can actually move a church further from its core mission. And what I'm saying by that is that sometimes we think that the riskiest thing to do is to somehow try to address something. But I think we just need to realize by doing nothing, you might find yourself drifting further away from what you're even trying to or intending to do. So I think we can see that coming out of Acts 4:32 as an example, 32 through 35. Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. So a part of the church's core identity here is the fact that we care for, we provide for everybody who is a part of the church family. But by doing nothing, do you see how they've actually moved further away from their mission? If they don't find a way to provide for the needs of these Hellenistic widows, then what we're going to find is doing nothing actually moves them away from their mission. So I think sometimes we think that the only way we can get off base with our mission focus is if we do something. But what we realize is doing nothing can cause even a drift away from some of our core mission values. And so the church in Acts 6 finds itself further away from its core mission here, which is a part of its mission is we're going to make sure that everybody is well cared for. And so they have to adapt in order to move once again to the heart of their kind of testimony, which is their care of one another. Now, another church principle here is that the presenting problem is not always the core problem. This is something that psychologists will note, that when somebody comes in and they say, here's the problem, the psychologist will often kind of unearth until they find out actually the problem is something other than what you're telling me that it is. See, as I look at this lack of care for the Hellenistic widows, I can think of at least 3 things that might have caused that problem. In fact, but I want to give you guys a chance to give some feedback first. Like, what do you think might be behind the fact that the Hellenistic widows were not being cared for nearly as well as the Hebrew ones? Now, as you're entering your comments, let me just explain a little bit about the difference between Hellenistic and Hebrews. These are both Jewish people. But what you have is the Hebrews would be people, say, from Jerusalem. The Hebrew is their mother tongue. It's their language. They'd in some ways be seen as a little bit more, the insiders of, say, Judaism, for example. A Hellenist is a Jew who is Greek-speaking. So this would be a person who is born outside of Jerusalem. Maybe they've lived in Cappadocia their whole life, and they're now in Jerusalem. And so these are not Jews versus Greeks. It's Hebrew-speaking Jews and Greek-speaking Jews. But what do you think might be some of the reasons? Go ahead and use your comment feature in terms of why. What might be behind the issue of the Hellenistic widows not being cared for in the same way or to the extent as the Hebrew widows? And maybe that's a really long answer and nobody wants to take the time to type it in their comment section. But I'll give a few seconds here and see if anybody has a comment. Just as a reminder, it takes me about 15 to 20 seconds to kind of register the comments that you guys put in there. Okay, so Dane mentions family connections. So what we may be having is, who's the ones who are making sure the distribution happens? Are they Hebrew people speaking, so they speak Aramaic, and so they're giving preferential treatment to some of, quote unquote, their own. Alan mentions, something very similar. I mean, the possibility of favoritism, a specific treatment of one people because of their language. Similar sort of thing. Cliff is mentioning communication. I mean, is it just, look, I mean, we showed up and we said dinner's here and nobody knew what we were saying and we didn't know what they were saying. Lori mentions that, maybe they weren't making their needs known, and maybe even connected to language barrier. Maybe when they tried to make their needs known, people just like, sorry, no idea what you're saying right now. Though likely most people would have spoke both Hebrew and Greek, even if you were a Hebrew speaker kind of original. I think you guys have probably heard the joke, haven't you? What's a person who speaks 3 languages? They're trilingual. What is a person who speaks 2 languages? They're bilingual. What is a person who speaks 1 language? They're an American. So people probably would have spoke most of and so Mona mentions the possibility of their social status. Certain people kind of having a higher social status and being treated in that way. Yeah, so there are some who are being added to their number daily, and so maybe they didn't know the traditions or the routine, and so everyone else, these Hebrew widows, kind of know the pattern of what this looks like, but the newer Grecian Hellenistic widows are saying, I don't know, how do I sign up on the list, or how do I get on the meal train? I mean, that sort of a question. Jerry mentioning also the possibility of language barrier, and Cliff mentioning this taking effort. And so I think all of these kind of are dancing around the three what I see as the main possibilities. I mean, one is it's possible that this is a theological issue regarding ethnicity. That what could be happening is people are saying, we Hebrews deserve better treatment than the Hellenists. And so if that's the problem, probably the best solution is we need to do a sermon series here on God's inclusion of all people. The other possibility is that it's just a pragmatic language disconnect. That one person says one thing and another person is like, sorry, I don't really understand what's going on. And the other possibility is it is just simply structural, that the church needs a new infrastructure to address the issue. So imagine for an example, you have people who get communion things ready. And when there was 15 people, that was okay for one person to get it ready, and then at the end they wash out their cups. But then now all of a sudden there's 100 people coming. Maybe you don't want to use washable cups. Okay, is there anything called like disposable communion cups? And okay, we're going to do that. So it's possible that this just simply it wasn't intentional. It wasn't ethnically motivated. It's just simply, man, we got more people here. Though it does seem very based on ethnicity. Like, in other words, if we're going with Hebrews, we know how to kind of do that, but these Hellenists, we don't know. But as Cliff mentions, it certainly takes more effort. And I think that what happened is the complaining raises it to the point where, okay, now this needs to be dealt with and it needs to be addressed. And so the solution that is proposed is Acts 6:3. Therefore, friends, select from among yourselves 7 men of good standing, full of the Spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint to this task. And so we see some additional leadership brought in here. As the disciples are growing, you can't have the same number of leaders who are now trying to care for an increasingly growing number of people. And so if the disciples are growing, the decision is we need more leadership to also simultaneously grow with this. And these 7 men are chosen. Now, what I do want us to notice is how this section ends in Acts 6:7. The word of God continued to spread. The number of disciples increased greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests became obedient to the faith. So this is Acts 6, 1-7 is intentionally set up like a bookend of sorts. So you have the problem is introduced in 6:1, and then 6:7 is basically saying, and it was resolved. And so you have this nice, kind of almost nicely wrapped unit where we say we came across a problem, the church addressed the problem, and the problem was resolved. But at the same time as saying as the problem was resolved, if we're paying attention, we will notice that what happens now is that the number of disciples increased greatly, which means in the very act of solving that problem, guess what they have just done? Somewhere down the road, we're going to anticipate that this increase in people may create another necessary adjustment, another necessary change for the church to make a way for that to happen. So I think one of the church principles here is that church unity is a strategic necessity to fill the mission of the church. In other words, when churches get too busy complaining, griping with one another, concerned about this piece or that piece, that's going to take the church's resource. And if you have all of those stacking up, then what's going to happen is we're going to just neglect mission, and we're going to just kind of come in and just only do housekeeping. So what this is saying is that this internal problem was raised in the church adapted its approach, and therefore the church could continue to grow. And so these this unity is the basis out of which mission will happen. And so for us to do mission, we need to make sure that there is this unity. Now, in addition to the problem being solved, I want you to see how something even better came out of it. So it's not just when the church appropriately resolves issues, when it adapts, when it innovates, when it changes, it's not just it figures out how to get back to where it was, but you'll find out that it's actually better off or healthier in some ways than it was. And so a couple of examples of that. First, two of those mentioned who were given a responsibility are Stephen and Philip. And the next two chapters of Acts, chapters 6, 7, and 8, so I guess really, 2.5 chapters, are going to essentially focus on Stephen's ministry and on Philip's ministry. So the church said, we need more ministry responsibility. They called up Stephen and Philip as a part of that process, and I think it becomes clear that they more than rose to the occasion, that they were called into this place of ministry, and then they kind of take off and they run with it, which I think it kind of serves to kind of highlight this note that churches need to increase ministerial responsibility, and others need to be empowered, which is the exact solution that was found here, was to empower people. But what I want us to see is by the church empowering these people, what you come to find is Stephen and Philip excel perhaps even more than they ever would have, that you now have more people who are involved heavily in that. I think that the other kind of corollary coming out of this, or the benefit coming out of this, is that the church is better prepared for its kind of progress into the heart of the Gentiles. So the movement through, say, specifically Acts 10 is about the church preparing itself to move into the like a full-on mission to the Gentiles. But this Hellenistic and Hebrew issue is theologically helping them resolve certain things that need to be resolved, that they can then slowly take the next step of who is this mission ultimately for, who are we to be reaching. So in the process of wrestling with this, the church is equipped to do something that's going to be a greater challenge for them even down the road. And the next thing we find is that the apostles are even better aligned and equipped for their calling. That as this happens, you find that the apostles to whom everything was initially laid at their feet, that's Acts 4, now part of what's being happening is that's going to be laid at the feet of some of these 7 men. So there's this distribution of responsibility, which not only allows those other leaders to kind of rise up and flourish, but it also allows the apostles to center in on what they think is their primary calling. And so I think that this small look at Acts 6 helps give us this framework for churches, and that's this notion that some things should not change. The church in Acts 6 kept mission. It kept its focus, its purpose. In fact, it moved more closely towards its mission. So there have to be some things that we hold on tightly to. There have to be things that are non-negotiables. We have to have immovable boundary stones. But at the same time, there should also be a lot of things that are always open for change. And that we need to be promoting those things that should be helping us to get to where we need to get to in terms of the mission. So I want to step out of Acts 6 and I want to look at ourselves again in the mirror. Why did we change? So beginning of class, you guys mentioned all of the things that we learned to do in a very short period of time. I want somebody to use the comment feature and let us know, why did we change? What precipitated that? What was the catalyst for our change? And yes, I will wait till someone undergoes the laborious effort to type an answer to that question. So we have all these changes, probably more changes than we had. And Brian mentions, and I think that's the right answer, Brian says we're forced to. We literally had no option. And I guess I want us to use this season to ask the question, what if we weren't forced to change? but we were passionate about our mission that we changed without being forced to. Like how high does the standard have to go? How forced do we have to be before we do something that maybe we should have been doing before? And what I mean by that is, the internet didn't just come on the scene. This thing called Facebook didn't just enter the world. This thing called YouTube didn't just drop from the sky. They've been there all along, but we've never really pursued those venues. And the reason we've not pursued those venues is not because we decided they were not legitimate venues for utilizing for the gospel. It wasn't that we decided that this is a better tool than that to utilize. We just simply said it's hard work to figure those things out, so we would rather be comfortable until we're forced out of our comfort zone. But when it comes to mission, maybe we should be so passionate that we would be forced out of our comfort zone for the sake of mission, even when we don't have to. So the thing that we have learned is we can change, we can adopt these new vehicles of sharing the gospel, but the question we'll have to ask ourselves when we get out of this is, will we be willing to change for the sake of mission when we get out of this quarantine? So let me ask the question, why is change so difficult? So I think in essence what we're saying is we're not going to change unless we're forced to. But why would that be? Why is change so difficult for us? I'll catch up on a few of the comments here. Holly mentioning I still need the church family. Yeah, certainly this recognition that the things we've come up with haven't solved all of the problems, but we have definitely become way more creative in trying to find venues to do that. Yeah, we have to know our mission first. Cliff mentions being intentional about our worship and our faith. Yeah, I think that intentionality is a key here. But so why is it that we don't change until we're kind of forced to? Okay, Jerry mentions, being outside of our comfort zone. There's no one, I think, that could say after we look back at everything to say, boy, this was the most comfortable 6 weeks of church life. We were forced way outside of our comfort zone. Alan mentions that change means more work for everyone involved, and absolutely no doubt about this. I mean, think about the difference between driving to church and sitting down and watching something than looking at this computer or this tablet or this phone and saying, now, how do I work this Facebook Live thing? Yeah, there is, it's a lot more work. Yeah, we don't like to, Sheila's mentioning, we don't like to change when we are comfortable. Lori mentions it's hard to know which direction to go when changing. Yeah, so, do you go left or do you go right? Pat mentions change gets us out of our comfort zone. Brian says, whoop, I'm going to cancel that. Sorry, apparently I'm noticing I'm shaking this as I'm trying to do this. We're humans and we sometimes don't want to change, which I think is absolutely true. We tend towards inertia, towards whatever is similar or familiar. Because Holly mentions it's something in our DNA, that's kind of the way that we've always been. Paula mentions that change creates progress. Cliff mentioning that there's risk involved in all this. And so I think it's just important that we recognize two things, which is we can change. I mean, we've proven it. 2 weeks, like, hooray for us. We can. The question is, what's going to force us to continue to change in the ways we did? Okay, it depends on the reason for the change. Dorian is mentioning it depends on the reason for the change, which is absolutely necessary. If we are changing for our mission, then we have a legitimate reason to change. If we think about the fact that, for example, young people are much more digitally inclined. In the past, when we've mentioned anything to do with like digital stuff, most of our older people will say something to the effect of, well, I don't do technology, which is fine. But mission might say, but what about those who do? How do we pursue those people? Sheila mentions, that we can be putting ourselves in a vulnerable position. There's a quote by a guy named Edward de Bono, and he says, "If there is a known and successful cure for an illness, the patient would much prefer the doctor to use this cure rather than to seek to design a better one. There may be better cures. How are they ever developed if at each moment the traditional treatment is preferred?" And I think that kind of echoes the statements that we've shared, which is when there's a pretty good answer on the table and it's really hard work to find a great answer, why don't we just put our feet up and just keep doing the pretty good answer? So, I mean, I've asked myself the question a lot. I mean, all of these tools Brian mentioned, we didn't have a YouTube channel coming on. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, but I do know that I never had motivation to say, is there a way we could use YouTube to better fulfill our mission? And it's for all the reasons we mentioned. It just seemed like a lot of work. And the work that we put in for mission, who's going to eat that fruit? Okay, so if you think about laboring, the fruit that is going to be eaten from a focus on mission is not any of us who are currently on this thing. We are going to be the ones who are putting in the extra work, the extra labor, the extra effort, perhaps even exposing ourselves to extra criticism in order to do it. But who will eat the fruit of it? It's those who are outside, those who are not yet a part of our body. And so I wonder whether that's at play too, is I will work hard in order to kind of eat a fruit that I want to eat, but if I'm not even going to get to taste it, why would I want to do it? So this is my preference. But I think that you see all throughout Acts, and I just took one example in Acts 6, the church is constantly in this process of innovating and of adapting to new things. And so I just want to finish with a few kind of comments about how do we create a healthy culture of change. And I'm intentional about using the word healthy because I'm not trying to say that change is good. There is healthy change and there is unhealthy change also. And I guess I'll just open that up for comments. What do you think are some things that we could do to create a healthy culture of change? We've learned that we can change. We also have learned that we're smart enough to change and not threaten our core values. So what do you think are things that after we come out of this kind of COVID-19 situation, what are some things that you think maybe we need to keep that in mind because it might help guide us as we move forward? How do we create a healthy culture of change? Okay, Dorian is mentioning getting input from multiple people instead of a select few. I saw a webinar, maybe it was about a week ago, and the guy was saying, long gone are the days of the single authoritarian leader. The pace of the world is changing so quickly that no one can keep up with it all. A group or a body of people might be able to keep up with all of the changes, but one person cannot. And so I think, Doreen, really that recognition that if the wisdom to do what we're going to do, it's not going to rest in any one person. So if somebody said, okay, Craig, you're going to figure all this out, I would be so overwhelmed. But if we as a body said we're going to do this, I think that becomes a lot more practical. Lori mentions be playful, and then she said, auto-corrected from praying. Be prayerful. Yeah, so if we're praying for open doors, for opportunities to utilize whatever this culture creates for God's glory, then we will be there. But I would also say it may have been a Freudian slip there, Lori. Being playful, I think, is also an important part of this, to say, you know what, if we try Facebook Live for a class and it's terrible, that's fine. Why do we have to always be so serious that if something doesn't go as planned, it's the end of the world? What if I don't know. What if we did a PowerPoint presentation and it turned out that nobody can even read that? Oh, do you know that program puts everything in Greek and nobody here reads Greek? Like, okay, that was terrible, but it's not the end of the world. So I do think we even need to have this playfulness in our approach to it. Mona mentions to continue to embrace the technology that we've learned. So let's ask ourselves the questions like, what parts of this do we think can be valuable to us even when we don't have to use it? And what parts of this do we think cannot be a suitable substitute for this other event? And again, that requires this aspect or element of time. Dane mentions keeping the ideas of change out front. And so I think what I would say of that is we recognize that sometimes by not doing anything, we move further away from our mission. So if we're trying to reach people and we're saying we're not going to explore technology as a venue to reach people, we are actually moving further away from our mission by making that one single decision. Alan mentions, don't be so critical of people who are trying to do something different. Let's be willing to experiment. Let's be willing to see. I will tell you this. This is how I am. I am not a very good predictor. Like to say, is this going to be a good idea or is that going to be a good idea? I may have my thoughts, my feelings, my intuitions, but I'm wrong at least 50% of the time. I'll tell you what I am really good at. Looking at something that we did and saying that was either really good or really not good. And so sometimes we need to just be able or willing to put things out there and say, so does that make any sense? And even realizing sometimes it may be terrible to begin with, but that doesn't mean it's a terrible idea. If I were to go back and watch some of my first Facebook Lives, as terrible as I'm doing now, I think I'm doing so much better in the beginning just simply because I got more experience and more exposure with it. And so sometimes even the very first time we do something, if it's a terrible thing, it doesn't even mean that it's a terrible thing. It just means we probably need a little bit more time to get used to that. Jerry mentioning doing nothing out of selfish ambition. And so if the thing that's driving us can't be, oh man, I want this, I love this, how do I get the church to do this for me? But if it's more, okay, this is not about me, this is about mission and this is about calling, then maybe we're willing to stick our neck out. Maybe we're willing to carry a burden in order for fruit to happen to other people. Jerry Ford mentions to communicate and to have open discussions where people feel free to share their ideas. Again, this recognition that the resource, and this is probably a church principle that we could have pulled out of Acts 6 that we didn't, which is the larger body that is involved, the better you're going to get a seeing rather than the smaller kind of group there. Doreen echoing again this, don't be afraid to admit failure. So I think that's really important, Doreen. Like, if we're going to experiment, everybody has to realize it's an experiment, even the person whose idea it is. And so, I may think it's going to be a great idea if we, if I start, just having a selfie stick and I just preach from home every Sunday. And I think it's a great idea. And the church says, okay, well, let's try it. I need to be willing to say, you know what, that didn't work. Not be so married to my idea that we couldn't call that a failure. So Brian is saying, if I can figure out how to get the Seymour to work here. There we go. So these changes, Brian has mentioned that were forced on us by society. They did leave some of the church behind. How do we put practices and steps into place to help people change alongside us? For full disclosure, we have about 11 people who are now on a mailing list who we send them DVDs of the last 2 weeks of Facebook class recordings and of sermon recordings because they don't have those tools and those resources. And so, being as inclusive as we can, where we say, majority of people have Facebook Live. There's also people who have been texting me. Donnie is a person, the Traps are a person, people who are not actually on Facebook. And the irony is I've thought about doing YouTube Live, and maybe I need to do that because there's not there. And I would say that as we look at these changes and people that are getting left behind, what I think we really need to do is we need to look at two segments of people getting left behind. The one is the segment of the people that we see in the pews, who we know this decision will leave them behind. But the other group that I don't feel like is represented as much in our discussion is the people who are not yet with us, who are going to get left behind because we refuse to pursue a certain venue. So which are we going to more viscerally connect with? It's those who we see who are going to get left behind is easier than leaving behind somebody who is not yet actually with us, though that they might, come in. So as we think about Facebook, for example, there's probably some younger people who might resonate with or connect with what we're doing on Facebook, but we may simultaneously have some older folks who are like, face what? We navigate our best to do that. Cliff mentions being willing to recognize progress. Yeah. So I think being able to, kind of like what I hope we did tonight, is to recognize, you know what? We have made progress. And it is also to allow, when progress happens, to just be able to say, great job. Not to say, okay, now we're going to just, we're going to pull you, because I certainly feel that you can't be a part of a church that all it's doing is changing. That there does need to be some stability in the midst of that. Holly mentions, I love seeing people on here who don't normally attend on Wednesday nights, which I think is a valuable discussion for us to have at some point, is for those who typically wouldn't be at the building but have been on here on Facebook, like, why is that? And also we should ask ourselves the question, why did it take us so long to ask that? Or to say, is there a way? Because maybe by insisting on it being at the building, if you're a parent with a young kid, you say, I'm being left behind because I'm just not going to be able to get my kids out that late. And so we can exert effort in trying to see, well, is there, open and creatively looking, is there a way to do that? Paul mentions that most of us just want to be heard, and we go in a different direction. At least we're validated when we feel heard. And so, I think just kind of recognizing that importance of just being sure people are heard. Because how are we going to even begin to say, okay, here's a way we can reach out to this specific group or these people, until we even understand, okay, what really is the challenge or the complication? Jeff mentions being open and honest, that there might be a better way. Realizing that the tools and the methods and the systems that we've used served us well for a time, but there may be something better out there. And let's constantly be allowing people to suggest or present better pathways forward. And Laura's mentioned, that's great that they're still able to get involved, that there certainly are some people who they can get involved more. And it's kind of the benefit for the class teachers there. So in the last couple of minutes, I'll just go over, I think most of mine have been covered here. This is kind of an echo of things that people said, but I think I just want to emphasize that a lot of church activities should have a shelf life. Just like food, it expires at a certain point. Just because something is a good idea for today, I don't think means in 2 years or 3 years we have to feel like the world's ending because we're no longer going to do X, Y, or Z. That somehow we need to be able to celebrate, like, this was a great thing in its day, for its time, but it's run its course. Maybe just as food, after it goes beyond its expiration date, it might start to smell a little off. Maybe some of our programs too. And it doesn't mean that they weren't great. It just simply means that maybe it's time for something, a new way to address the same problem. That really, in doing something new, all you're trying to do is to solve the same problem that first thing began to try. I think that we need to accept the fact that mistakes will be made. I mean, unless we create a culture that we say, you know what, if you make a mistake, that's not the end of the world, nobody is going to feel comfortable making mistakes. Creating a space for reflection. What's going well, what's not going well, what can be improved. Sometimes we're just so compressed in the busyness of this moment that we never step back and say, kind of take the 10,000 foot view and say, how is this going? Is there another way we could be doing this? Anyways, I've learned so much from this because I've been, like all of you, forced to learn. One of the things that I'm hoping is that I can take that learner posture from this out and to say, what if, maybe once a year I need to say, what if COVID happened? What would I look at? What would I research? What would I find out? And I may find that there are tools that are there that have always been there that I just never looked at. So that's our thoughts for class tonight. I'll stick around for a few minutes if people want to just visit a little bit online. If you have any comments or questions for each other, you're certainly welcome to do that. Just as a reminder, for this coming Sunday, we'll be having 2 services again. First service, masks are required, begins at 9:30 a.m. and then 11 we have a masks optional worship service. Masks recommended, I think, is the actual language. Lori, you're most welcome. Happy to do it. It's nice to be able to connect this way. Yeah, I think, Mona, realizing that there's some good that comes out of the situation, that maybe the situation we find ourselves better postured even than if it hadn't happened. Yeah, Paulo, miss everyone too. It was good to see you briefly on Sunday. I do feel bad about it. I saw a lot of folks, but I didn't really hardly get to talk to anyone, just how everything was set up. Pat, you are most welcome. Brian says, question for the podcast. Can you please go into detail what you mean by this in reference to our mission? Okay. Yeah. Probably is good to talk about our mission. It's probably something we dramatically underemphasize. And a part of that may be because it's not a specific clarified thing. So yeah, good question. I think it is something that we should address directly at some point. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Don't even necessarily need to be related to the class, but certainly could be. This is like the church is over. You're visiting, hanging out with one another. I saw an email about teaching online, and it says make sure people have a chance to connect. It also says don't do a class over 30 minutes. I didn't keep that one, but maybe I can give people a chance to connect. Yeah, Sheila mentions great discussion, and that's one of the things that I've appreciated is us finding a little bit better ways to have some good discussion. I really appreciate everyone's feedback. One of the things that I've missed most about class is that interaction that we typically get in a face-to-face class. I realized how selfish I am when I teach because you guys become guinea pigs for my ideas and help me refine my ideas, and it's just harder to do in this venue here together. Elizabeth Ford says to say hi to everyone. Hi to everyone from Elizabeth Ford. Tara says that she liked the playful comment, Lori. Let's be playful. Oh man, and that's already got 3 hearts. It's practically the most popular comment of the night. Yeah, Mona, it's interesting. Mona mentions that we get more class participation than we do at church. I had somebody texted me probably 2 or 3 weeks into this and said, this is creating a really interesting kind of sociological experiment, which is the people who are making comments via Facebook are not always the same people who make comments in classes. And the question was asked, is there a way that we could somehow incorporate questions or comments in this format where people might feel more comfortable, say, texting in a comment rather than saying a comment? And so that becomes another one of those, okay, why are certain people here that aren't other places? I think is an interesting question. And are people just more comfortable sharing in certain formats than others? And so, yeah, I think, Mona, that's a great observation. I think something for us to learn there. Judy Hostetter says hi to Elizabeth. Anybody have any big plans for this weekend? Seems like there's not really much of, well, I guess, is it this Friday that movie theaters open? Or was that last Friday? I'm such a not avid movie person, it kind of passed me by, but is that this Friday or last Friday that movie theaters can open? I noticed that in Wyoming, they're going to start opening movie theaters here pretty soon, but a max of 25 people. Even churches can meet, but they have to be under 25 in Wyoming. Gay mentions that she gets to cuddle a week-old. I wonder if that makes Richard jealous. So make sure that you multiply the love with the family members. But yeah, little Grayson will be excited to see his presentation to the church, see him in the flesh. Mona is planting a garden I'm assuming that's this weekend. Certainly probably something that the Fords should do. Jerry, put it on a calendar. Plant a garden. Okay, Lori Peterson is mentioning that Lance has found a job, and so that is a blessing indeed. We're grateful for that. Sheila is running into all the kings. So if your last name is King, maybe don't go walking on the road, or Sheila is going to run into you. Sheila is also doing DoorDash, delivering food. That's another thing that maybe people have learned to do individually that they've never done before is DoorDash. I actually have, I believe, it's with DoorDash. I have a credit card that gives me a $60 credit with DoorDash, and I've never used it. Maybe I will sometime. Maybe I should do DoorDash if I could specifically request Sheila come and drop it off. Shelby, we wish we could get these new babies together. Yeah, we all would love to see those babies. Shelby, I would say one of my highlights of the Billings Chipper connection is still Miss Evelyn saying, "Hello, church. This is my brother Bobo." It's pretty cute. Well, I guess since I was going to say there's no more comments, there are these thingies popping up the side. Loomis is also dashing. I'm assuming that's a reference to DoorDash, not how good Todd Loomis looks or Tammy or something. They're just so dashing. Jerry Ford is hoping to play pickleball if it stops raining. Whew. Hopefully it does. Should remind everybody, Andy is saying, first of all, that she's making a trip to Bozeman on Saturday for family birthdays. There is also another birthday today, Miss Corinna Slater's birthday. I don't know if she wants anybody to know how old she is or not, so I won't say, but she's older than me, in case you're wondering. She is older than me. Shelby, I watch it over and over again. She actually does talk, just not in person. Yeah, we've got at least one kid that way, who they will share things in our own house, and then outside of the house, pretty locked lip. I was also thankful too. I saw Scott Litton came to the building yesterday, and Michael Noble. They were looking at some stage. There's lots of different things that have been going on around the church. If you haven't seen it, you might take a field trip over here. And I don't know if I'm allowed to give you permission to sneak into the basement since it's apparently closed during services. But don't ask, don't tell policy. But we've got our workroom downstairs has been converted over to a classroom. We've got some stuff to do on the floor there, but it's looking really good. So we have another classroom that's going to be opening up, and a lot of stuff been cleaned up here. So it may look like a new building when you guys get back here. Paula is wishing a happy birthday to Corinna. Gay is wishing someone a happy anniversary. That may or may not be next. Next Wednesday night is Jerry and my 20th anniversary, and so I had negotiated with Rod that I would teach this Wednesday, he'll teach next Wednesday, and I'll teach after that. So our anniversary will be, Rod, it better be a really good class, because we will spend our anniversary holding hands watching your Facebook Live class next Wednesday night. So thank you, Gay. I certainly appreciate that. I keep seeing Caitlin Monday's face pop up there as she, like a good millennial, pushes these buttons and knows how to work all that. Maybe sometime I should figure out how to, I don't know if I can even do any of that from here or not. Oh, nope. Caitlin, I felt bad that I didn't get to see you. Oh, I may or may not have just broken my thing. On Sunday, I was glad to see you, but I didn't really get talking to you. Okay, there's all these weird things. Okay, I'm going to push a button of a king. What does that do? Oh, boy. Okay, so apparently, okay, I should not have discovered this feature. I may or may not ever be able to. Yes. Oh, man. This is a really dangerous feature I just discovered here. Okay, I like that look. That's pretty intimidating. Here's what I looked like when I was in high school. Leave now. Okay, that's my face tattoos there apparently. What is this going to do?